When you board a flight, you're stepping into a system that sells certainty, uniforms, checklists, procedures, calm voices. Aviation is built on the idea that risk can be managed, measured, contained, reduced. Most passengers also carry a comforting assumption that the people in the cockpit, the tower, and the hangar were selected because they're unusually stable, unusually resilient, almost immune to the kind of pressure that breaks other workplaces. But the industry doesn't run on immunity. It runs on performance. And performance is something people can deliver even while quietly deteriorating, especially when the consequences of admitting it feel larger than the consequences of hiding it. Aviation doesn't actually require perfection. It requires documentation that looks like perfection. To understand how this system really works, it helps to listen all the way through. If safety is the priority, why would anyone in this industry avoid getting help? The hidden safety of aviation. Aviation is regulated through proof. For many safety-critical jobs, recurring medical and performance checks decide who is fit. In theory, that protects the public. In practice, it often filters for something narrower, not who is struggling, but who has a recorded history of struggling. That difference creates a quiet behavioral shift. If the system primarily reacts to documented information, then the safest personal strategy becomes reduce what gets documented. And unlike a broken bone visible, time-bound, straightforward to treat mental strain can be ambiguous. It doesn't arrive with an X-ray. It often arrives as fatigue, irritability, insomnia, a sense of dread that's hard to prove and easy to deny. So the first pressure forms quietly. Stay competent and stay undocumented.
People think that to be allowed to fly, you have to prove you're perfect. The reality is different. You only have to prove that there's no paperwork saying you're not. I don't lie during medical evaluations. I answer exactly what I'm asked, and I avoid questions I'm not required to answer. I've thought about talking to a doctor. Not because I'm out of control today, but because I'm tired. Really tired. And then I think about my license, about being grounded, about everything stopping because of a single appointment. In this industry, there's an unofficial saying, if you're not diagnosed, you don't have a problem. I fly with people like me every day. They're not crazy. They're not dangerous. They're just holding it together so they look fine. The scariest part isn't having a problem. It's knowing the system is designed so you're never allowed to admit it.
Mark's logic is simple. When disclosure can end your ability to work, disclosure becomes the risk, not the tiredness, not the stress. The paper trail. What happens when doing the right thing becomes the fastest way to lose everything? Safety systems assume cooperation. Report early, get treated, return. But aviation is also a profession built on permissions. A credential can be paused with one note in a file, and the route back can be slow, complex, and uncertain. That uncertainty matters as much as the grounding itself. If you know you'll be evaluated, treated, and re-cleared on a predictable timeline, you can plan your life. If you don't know, you can't plan anything, and the unknown becomes a deterrent stronger than the original symptoms. That deterrent doesn't just affect the person who reports. It affects everyone watching.
We thought seeking help was the right decision. At least, That's what everyone tells you. But no one tells you what happens afterward. When my husband took leave to get treatment, everything stopped. No flying. No clear path back. No real answers. Every time we asked, we heard the same thing. The file is still under review. 2 years passes very slowly when income is unstable and your future is suspended. I started asking myself, if we hadn't said anything, would everything have been simpler? The system says safety comes first. But it doesn't seem to know what to do with people who choose to be honest. The hardest part isn't the waiting. It's the feeling that you did the right thing and were punished for it.
Linda describes the part passengers never see. Not just grounding, but limbo. When the path back is unclear, the workforce learns a cold, practical rule. Silence is safer than the process. If formal care is risky, what replaces it? Stress doesn't disappear when people avoid doctors. It reroutes into whatever is tolerated and administratively invisible. In safety-critical work, that invisibility is a problem. Because the system can audit maintenance logs and training records. It can't audit the private rituals people use to get through another week.
We don't call it self-destruction. We call it blowing off steam. After a night shift, a few beers. After a long day, a few more. No one asks questions. No one documents it. And most importantly, no one reports it. If you tell a doctor you're stressed, it goes into your record. If you drink, there is no recordings. So you choose the option that's less risky for your career. I know it's not healthy. Everyone knows that. But in my line of work, alcohol doesn't cost you your certification. Therapy does. That's the paradox. We work on machines that could kill hundreds of people if something goes wrong. But the way we take care of ourselves is built around avoiding the healthcare system. I don't think the public understands that. But inside the industry, this isn't a secret. It's a habit.
Dave isn't arguing that alcohol is safe. He's explaining why it feels safer than honesty. When documented care carries career consequences, coping migrates to what leaves no record until the habit itself becomes the risk. And if paperwork is the trigger, what happens to the people who already have it? Regulators must predict future performance, so they rely on categories. But categories can be blunt. They can treat very different lives as identical risk. That bluntness has two downstream effects. First, it can exclude capable people who could have performed safely with the right supports. Second, it teaches everyone else a lesson. The best diagnosis is no diagnosis.
I never got to sit in a cockpit, but I was disqualified from one. I was diagnosed with ADHD in school, and that was enough. No one asked how focused I am when I'm doing something I care about. No one tested my reflexes or discipline. The diagnosis came before the person. I watched my friends learn to fly while I rewrote my entire life plan over one line in a medical file. What makes me angry isn't the rule itself. It's never being given a chance to prove myself. The system says it can't accept risk. but it also refuses to distinguish between someone who can't do the job and someone who's just different. I don't think my case is rare. I think I was just documented, while others weren't.
Ethan exposes the unevenness. Strict rules can fall hardest on the people whose history is visible. Others with similar struggles but no documented trail may pass through. So the policy can unintentionally select for one trait above all: the ability to keep your medical history clean on paper. So why don't the veterans, the people with leverage, force change? Aviation careers are narrow funnels. Years of training lead to one permission: stay certified. Lose it, and the economic shock can be immediate. The fear here isn't just losing a job. It's losing a specialized identity with few comparable alternatives, and losing it through a process you may not control.
After 20 years in this job, everything you have is tied to one card: your home, your family, your kids' tuition. All of it depends on whether you're still allowed to fly. I'm not afraid of being vulnerable. I'm afraid of a system that doesn't allow you to be, even once. At this stage of life, I can't switch careers. There's nothing else I'm qualified to do that pays anything close to this. So you learn how to stay quiet. Not because you're irresponsible, but because you have too much to lose. People think pilots are trained to make hard decisions. Yep. But the hardest decision I've ever faced wasn't in the cockpit. It was deciding whether to admit I wasn't okay, or keep flying as if everything was fine.
Carlos isn't defending denial. He's describing concentrated risk. One credential controls an entire livelihood. In that structure, even reasonable policies can produce fear-driven silence, especially when examples of what happens if you disclose circulate through the workforce. In control rooms and towers, that silence becomes visible because everyone works side by side. Air traffic control compresses complexity into seconds. It depends on sharp attention, stable judgment, and trust. From the outside, it's easy to assume the system catches impairment early. From the inside, the question can flip. Are we catching problems, or are we catching paperwork?
I understand why the rules exist. I don't want someone unfit controlling the sky. But I also see people who aren't okay, still sitting there, right next to me, doing the job. They don't seek treatment because they know what will happen if they do. So the question becomes, are we actually safer or just less honest? Every day, I make decisions in seconds, but the system gives me no flexibility to be human. I believe in safety, but I don't believe pretending everyone is fine is how you achieve it. The hardest part is knowing this isn't about individuals. It's structural, and you're both protecting the system and being crushed by it.
Safer or less honest is the fulcrum. Aviation is built to catch small deviations early. But when deviation becomes a career event on paper, people delay the first moment it becomes official. If the industry recognizes this, why does it keep running this way? Most passengers imagine enforcement is consistent and objective. But in complex systems, stability can come from mutual silence about manageable strain, not because people don't care, because the tool the system uses, documentation, can't measure everything that matters.
The public believes we're selected because we're perfect.
The truth is, we're selected because we know how to look perfect. The system doesn't detect problems. It detects paperwork. So people learn how to avoid paperwork. Not because they're bad people, but because they're trying to survive in the industry. The dirty secret isn't that we have problems. The dirty secret is this: everyone knows. There's just no incentive to change it, Canoid, because change would be expensive. So everything keeps running. Smooth. Quiet. Until something breaks. And only then does the public find out.
This is the equilibrium. A paperwork-triggered system teaches people to manage paperwork. The industry can look stable because most days performance holds. But stability achieved through concealment is fragile because it depends on individuals carrying stress privately, indefinitely. So what would make honesty the lower risk choice? The goal isn't to ignore impairment. The goal is earlier truth. Not confession after a crisis, but intervention while performance is still intact. That usually requires a different structure than disclose and hope. It requires predictable pathways, clear criteria for when someone must be removed from duty, and clear criteria for how they return. Timelines people can plan around. Decisions that are proportional to functional ability, not just a label. It also requires trust in confidentiality. In many workplaces, the simplest fear is not "I'll be treated." And often, it's "my private care will become official evidence against me." And finally, it requires a cultural signal that early reporting is valued, not as a slogan, but as an observed reality, because people learn culture by watching what happens to the last person who tried. If those elements are missing, the system keeps selecting for the same trait, the ability to look fine on paper. Aviation remains one of the safest ways to travel, built on engineering and relentless learning. But the public myth, "only perfect people are allowed to fly," isn't the operating reality. The real filter is paperwork, and the strongest incentive is to stay off the record. Mark's tiredness, Linda's limbo, Dave's invisible coping, Ethan's documented exclusion, Carlos's fear, Sarah's contradiction, and the insider's blunt summary. They point to one conclusion: a safety culture that makes honesty risky will produce cleaner files, not necessarily healthier people. And the cost of that is paid in silence, right up until silence stops working. If examinations like this matter to you, consider following this channel. We continue to look at how real systems operate, often quietly and out of public view.